welcome all. Happy New Year. This is our first event of 2022, and the topic is supporting mental health in the workplace, which is well timed actually, because next Monday is Blue Monday, as they call it, which is supposedly the saddest day of the year because we've all overspent and overeaten at Christmas and the weather's bad. The year's stretching ahead and it's all rather gloomy, so it's maybe not a bad time to talk about this. You may have noticed that we're recording the session, and so it will be available on the community portal early next week, and we're also going to add a written summary of the main points that we intend to cover today onto the portal as well. So don't worry about needing to make lots of notes, because we're going to make the material available to you next week. Today's panel includes Karen Gibb and Chris Miles from the People Solutions team, who you may well be familiar with already from previous sessions. And today we're joined by Richard Singleton, who is Menzies Finance Director, but he's here today in his capacity as one of our mental health first aiders, which is something that we're going to hear more about later.
Morning.
Please do pose questions and comments in the chat box. Chris is going to be keeping an eye on that and making sure that we bring you in as and when you've got a comment or a question. Either that or we'll pick them up at the end. We did have one question submitted in advance, which we'll come to towards the end. But please, we don't have the monopoly on all the ideas on this, so please submit your ideas, things that have worked, questions that you've got, in order that we can then perhaps continue the discussion in the community afterwards and actually develop this into something that we can all learn from. So please put your comments in the chat box. That would be very welcome. So why this topic? Well, apart from Blue Monday coming up, the need for good mental well-being has obviously been a particular focus over the last couple of years especially, and we are seeing employers tackle it much more proactively than they have done before. Although there's still a long way to go, I would say we're seeing a markedly more open attitude to discussing our mental health at work, and hopefully a greater understanding and level of support becoming available to employees. So we wanted to share our experiences and suggestions and maybe help you with some strategies to support your employees. Please, however, as I say, share your experiences so that we can turn this into a proper discussion. So good mental health and well-being enhances resilience. It promotes our ability to cope with day-to-day stress and helps us to work productively. Stress is obviously an important element of this. And from an HR management point of view, we quite like a chart that I'm just going to try to show you, which demonstrates the relationship between pressure and performance. So my team advised me against trying to be too clever on this. So they're probably about to be proved right when I completely messed up sharing my screen, but here we go. Right, so hopefully you can see that. Am I going to get a few nods from the panel? Yes, brilliant, thank you. So this is the pressure performance curve, and what it shows is the relationship, obviously, between the amount of pressure we're put under and what it does to our performance. And what we can see is that too little pressure can lead to boredom, and that in itself can bring its own stresses, actually. And that we do require a level of pressure in the system to be able to motivate as part of our sort of motivation to perform. But what we're aiming for is to be in this kind of this level of sort of comfort and maybe stretch. But as the pressure builds and builds, stretch becomes strain, and then panic, and then our performance drops off a cliff right at the end there. So as individuals, we all have different tolerances for this. Okay, we all have, you know, and of course, we all have other things going on in our lives that might either accentuate the effects of stress or ease them. So the point here from an HR point of view is that we really want to try to keep people in this area of kind of comfort and stretch. And I see that very much as kind of the challenge, management challenge, is to be able to provide enough motivation and kind of opportunity and challenge to keep people motivated and in this area here, ideally kind of here where they're going to be kind of optimizing their performance, but being very aware of where people might be either side of that curve, and then having the skills and the policies and the ability to pick that up and deal with it when it happens. And that's really going to be the kind of theme of the things that we talk about going forward in this session. So let me just stop sharing that for a second. Okay, so the costs and consequences of poor mental health are very real. They're considerable for both for the individuals involved and also the businesses they work in, because clearly it can lead to poor performance, lower productivity, mistakes happen, unhappiness at work, team conflicts, obviously absenteeism, higher levels of staff turnover, and reduced levels of engagement and motivation. And the reason why that needs to be taken on board by businesses is because absence through mental health and stress issues is very significant. So in the CIPD's latest health and wellbeing at work survey from 2021, it found that mental ill health is the most common cause of long-term absence, that is absences lasting 4 weeks or more. And stress and mental ill health also features as 4th and 5th respectively on the list of reasons for short-term absences too. So, you know, these are very significant features, and therefore it makes absolute sense to focus on them as issues and put things in place to mitigate the effects and support employees in their mental well-being. So I'm going to hand over to Karen at that point so that we can start sort of talking about the kind of solutions that can work.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Yeah, the aim of today is to give you some things to kind of almost tick off and think, well, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm really happy about that. And if we're talking about things where maybe you haven't considered taking those steps as part of your overall management practice, then now's maybe the time to think about it. And my starting segment is really stating the obvious, because I'm going to talk about just good general management practice. But if any of this kind of makes you feel a little bit uneasy and you're not completely sure that you or your managers are doing these things, then it's definitely time to kind of take a look. And I'm talking about really simple best management practice. So, you know, clear job responsibilities, ideally job descriptions where people have things, you know, written down, and it's clear where responsibilities sit within a team, and it's clear what targets and aims people are working towards, and accountability for achieving those is really clear. You know, fair and consistent management. So that's demonstrated by how you react to situations and how you deal with people, and that people can see that there's consistency in the decisions that are made, and those decisions are well communicated. Feedback to employees on performance, tackling issues in a timely way, in a considerate and timely way, and improving performance where you need to, and giving, you know, praise and reward for good performance. So all things that we would want to be doing anyway. And I think the sort of one step further is, you know, I challenge you to say, how well are you engaging with your employees? You know, do you know them? Do you understand something about what makes them tick? Do you know anything about their personal lives, as much as they would want to share with you, but Do you know what stresses them? Do you know what concerns them, what they're thinking about? Do you know if they've got their work-life balance right, and if they need more help with anything like that? So the better you engage, the better you know what motivates them and what's going on with them, without being overly personal if they don't want to be. But the better you know that, the more you'll know if they're hitting stress and pressures that they can't cope with very well, and also whether there's anything you can do to help with that. Good work-life balance has become a really big topic during the last couple of years, because we've had to flex the way we work so much. But how good is your work-life balance in your business? And could you do more to make that an environment where your employees can balance inside work and out in a better way? And the classic sort of open door policy, where you're available, you're visible, you're communicating appropriately to your employees. And if there is feedback that you need to hear from them about their experiences or how they're feeling at this point, are you ready, available, and are you listening when they need to talk to somebody? So hopefully all those things get a tick at this point. I'm going to let Chris take these things a stage further, because she's certainly got some examples and experiences to share over the last couple of years, when all of the stuff that I've said has become even more important.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. The one big impact, you know, the biggest impact on people's mental health and work-life balance in the last, you know, well, nearly 2 years now we're talking, I can't believe it, but is obviously, you know, the pandemic and the impact it's had on everybody, and working from home for a lot of businesses and a lot of staff. I think probably when the pandemic started and we all started working from home, there were a number of us who were trying to do our jobs surrounded by dogs, children, family members, and balancing a number of stresses at the time. But now, although a lot of us are working from home again, schools are still open, retail, hospitality, some other businesses are open, and so your employees may well now be finding themselves sat at home all day on their own. And so if you haven't got regular contact with those members of staff, then they're going to be feeling pretty isolated and probably quite lonely. And then you start getting that lack of motivation that Ed was mentioning earlier. So it's really important to be aware of how that is impacting your staff, whether you've got a staff member who absolutely loves being at home, loves peace and quiet and thinks it's really great, that would be me, or those who are trying to, as I say, who just really don't operate well at home when they're sat on their own and isolated. So how can you mitigate this now and generally when the offices are open? I mean, it's really important to keep in regular touch. I think I'm going to use a few examples from clients and from Menzies, because I think Menzies have done a fantastic job over the last couple of years with regular communications to all staff from both senior leadership, line managers and the HR team. So they've done a really good job of keeping everyone up to speed with what's expected, what's needed, and what's on offer to support people. That's been really good. I've got a client who's also made a point of having regular one-to-ones with their team to check in, not every week, not too onerous, but just a quick check-in every week with everybody individually, so that if they've got any issues, they can raise them without feeling like everybody's watching. Because it's very difficult on Zoom to have those side conversations that you would do if you were in a meeting room. So that's really useful, and that's really helped them sort of find and deal with some issues before they've become too big. Virtual social events. So if you think about when we were in the office, we used to go for drinks after work, or there'd be lunchtime meetings. Now, obviously, it's not ideal to replicate those things online, but it can be done, and it does help sometimes, I think, to have a chat with employees or as a team that isn't just about what the work is at the moment. Actually, those conversations around how was your weekend and sharing anecdotes about the school run, things that you would normally do while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. That is, it's important to keep those things ticking over. And physical well-being. You know, we're all sat at our, you know, a lot of people are sat at desks at home. Having some kind of motivation to get people out and moving. So Menzies are currently running a step challenge, which I think you're winning in Woking at the moment. A step challenge will encouraging everyone to get out and get walking every day. So and it's a you know, there's some good old-fashioned competition between the offices to see who can record the most steps. So the more times we can get out and walk, better. But it also really helps with our mental health. And anything like that, I think, is, you know, that brings people together, but also you know, improves physical and well-being is really useful too. And I think the final thing I was going to mention was something slightly more formal, which is a lot of businesses use or can have access to an EAP scheme, so an employee assistance program, which can cover off. It usually comes with an online or telephone help resource, which it kind of can cover off some of these things. I think Ed alluded to it earlier about it's not just work factors that can cause stress. Your stress factors can come from other things in your life. And an EAP scheme can help with providing support on things like debt management, legal resources, any of that, and some usually some telephone counselling as well, so that you can help mitigate some of those stress triggers before they become much bigger and then start to have much bigger impact on work. So that's a really useful scheme. Appreciate that a lot of smaller businesses necessarily can't always access that kind of resource because of the size of the business, but we do have that facility for clients, so we can always, if that is something that you think might be useful, then please do get in touch with us. But yeah, so I think it's just about keeping in touch, as Karen said previously, keep in touch with people and have a chat with them, and I think that really helps. You know, keep the communications going, and it helps you drill down and find out if there's anything wrong before it becomes a really big problem.
Thanks, Chris, and you know, really great examples of certainly what we've experienced, both from our own employer Menzies and also from some of our clients. And I think we've definitely, everyone in a management sort of situation has learned a lot more about the individual circumstances of their employees over the last couple of years. And I think it's the kind of, and as Karen says, you know, you've got to tread the line right between not being too intrusive, but you do need to know a certain amount or show a certain level of interest in the individual circumstances of your team in order to be able to properly support them. And I certainly know with one of my clients at the moment, going through a process of now that people are back at home again, primarily working for the time being, you know, understanding that is extraordinarily difficult for some members of staff, you know, both psychologically and practically. You know, as Chris alluded to, some of us get on really well working at home, some of us much prefer to be in the working in the team environment, and some people have real practical difficulties of space, isolation, you know, and so that really has, but I'm hoping what's happened over the last couple of years is that we've got into much better habits of showing that kind of interest and being comfortable in asking how people are doing and what their particular circumstances are and how we can help them to overcome their particular challenges. Rich, I'm going to come to you now, actually, because the mental health first aid initiative is something that Menzies created, which has been which follows on really nicely from the kind of support that Chris was talking about. But can you tell us, you know, about how that came about and how it works in practice?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So I thought I'd just would be useful to give a sort of real life example of what we've been doing at Menzies. Certainly not the golden answer to it all, and everything that the guys have mentioned in the last 10-20 minutes is obviously the bedrock of well-being in any company. And we're lucky, I think, at the moment that mental health is everywhere. It's in the media. There are articles everywhere, helplines, things that people can do, and even down to the point of Chris's point about fresh air, exercise. You know, that all forms a bedrock of any well-being and aids mental health. Now, at Menzies, we'd looked at mental health first aider courses for a few years now, and I think they were always going to come in at some point, but we sort of left it until back end of 2019, where we thought that was the time to do it. So even pre-pandemic, we felt that it was really the time. So about 20 or so of Menzies staff were chosen to be part of the training process, which, to put into context, is about 5% of our workforce. As with any business, we felt as though we had a duty of care to our employees to prevent personal injury and provide a safe working environment. We felt as though our employees' mental health was just as important as physical health, especially in an office environment where probably physical health may not impair sort of office workers as much as the mental health. And so it was important for us to have at least 2 qualified people in each office. So we've got 7 offices spread across different service lines and varying seniority to allow much more coverage. And having the different seniority means, in theory, people may feel comfortable approaching or talking to someone that's less senior than them, more senior than them. You know, just someone should always be able to find someone that is approachable to them. I believe the aim is actually, in the long run, over the next couple of years, to double the number of staff trained. And ideally, we'd have everyone from a manager up or so having awareness of mental health, if not everyone in the firm. So from a personal point of view as well, I think this means, though, now I feel I'm better equipped when talking to people about any problems they're having. We've talked a lot about work stresses, but obviously tends to be a lot of mental health illness actually comes from other aspects of people's lives. So what the course does is really give you ideas, ways to approach people, and it gives you in theory, it gives you the confidence to talk to people about the problems they're having. And from a Menzies point of view, it obviously means we're providing more assistance, help on top of our EAP or any support networks like the Samaritans, for example. If anyone's concerned about the qualification, it's mainly to give you the tools to help with early intervention. It's certainly the way I look at it now, I've been through it, it is very similar to a physical first aider. So that the role of that as a mental health first aider is being able to recognize the early signs and symptoms of common workplace mental health illnesses, having the necessary skills to have a supportive, non-judgmental conversation with those who need it, possessing the knowledge and confidence to guide colleagues to the appropriate professional support if they require it, and promoting greater awareness of mental health in the workplace and really reducing the stigma that is unfortunately still attached to it. In a way, as I mentioned, it's very, very similar to a physical health first aider, sorry. And that's what I would really promote to you guys listening, is that if going through this qualification doesn't make you a psychologist, doesn't make you being a doctor, doesn't give you any of that, but it's very much like a health first aider. You're not there to provide significant medical help, but you're a first point of call to help understand what they may need, if anything, of course, and help them until a more qualified individual can. In my experience, this can be anything from a chat about being stressed with work, or something's happened in the week, someone said something to someone that's upset you, or it can be much more serious, depression, or someone really needing further help following a more significant event. It can really be anything. And as Ed said, people really do deal with stress differently. And unfortunately, there is still a bit of stigma that, you know, and terms are banded around, snowflake and all these sorts of things. And unfortunately, that can be the case, but a lot of the time it's just people deal with the stresses differently, and it all needs to be dealt with very carefully, especially in a work environment. This will tend to be most useful to someone who sees people in the workplace. Obviously, we did this before the pandemic and lockdowns and people being at home, which has provided a lot of issues with trying to be a mental health first aider. You have to try and spot the signs over a video call, which can be difficult. But obviously, for the businesses listening, if you're in a manufacturing business or somewhere where you're producing something, or you've got people on a all together somewhere, it would be useful to provide this training to someone who is a supervisor, for example, where they can recognize someone struggling. You know, they may see them every day and they can notice the small changes in the behavior that can really be a sign. To give a rough indication, I think at the moment the online courses, including the manuals, are about £300 per person. So not significant, and will obviously vary on the provider or the number of people you put forward for it. I think the way we look at it is actually it could be considered very good money spent. If it helps 1 or 2 members of staff a year, it can obviously mitigate lost production, mitigate any claims coming through dealing with a person going through this badly, and obviously sickness absence. So £300 compared to lost production or sick pay can obviously be a good investment. And that's all from me. Obviously, any questions, let us know and I'll try and answer them at the end.
Great, thanks, Richard. I think that's been a really fantastic initiative, and I know it's one that's gaining traction generally, across probably the larger organisations, but it's definitely something that's applicable all round. And certainly, if you're a small business, then a £300 investment in sounds you made a very good case for it in terms of you haven't got to go very far to save a couple of days absence, or or much worse, a more entrenched long-term situation, that to make it very, very much worthwhile. And the proof of the pudding, I suppose, is in the eating. So have people come forward? I mean, have there been conversations that have happened where people have perhaps been assisted where previously they might not have been, or may not have seen the opportunity?
Yeah, completely. I think statistics wise, you'd always like to be able to show if it's been a real success, but obviously, unfortunately, in this, with the mental health side of things, it's all confidential, so we don't tend to have lots of numbers. We'd love to be able to say, we've helped this many people, but obviously a lot of the conversations fly under the radar, as they have to. I think from conversations we've had as a group of mental health first aiders, certainly each of us has had at least half a dozen conversations. Some people have had a lot more, because again, talking about the difference in seniority and the spread of the people, it's just sometimes some people are more approachable to others and some aren't. So there are a few we found actually by getting perhaps the partners in the firm, who are effectively the directors of the firm, actually aren't quite as approachable as perhaps some people sort of in the middle management side of things, because people don't necessarily want to open up, and that goes back to the stigma point. People don't necessarily want to own up to having these problems to their boss, because then it may have implications and people may see them as weak or whatever it is, and that's still a problem we have. But no, overall we consider it a big success. We still get, and I think the problem is it's not been a normal 18, 20 months, 2 years. And we are still getting a lot of people that we may be able to have had these sort of water cooler or coffee machine conversations, which is really where a lot of these start. You see someone, and we see people like it all the time, with their head down at the desk, not getting up to go for lunch, sort of lingering, staring at the wall, all these things that you may spot with someone that is usually a real chatty person. That's usually the trigger just to say, how you doing? And that's really the start of that conversation. It's not any more than that. It's just that obviously with mental health problems, it's harder to spot than if someone's cut their finger off, for example, and you can go and help them, and it's So we have still had a lot of issues during the pandemic because we haven't been able to spot things. You know, but simple things these days. So if you're having conversations with staff, we have a lot of staff that refuse to put their video on conversations, and that can be nothing. They can just be, maybe they haven't got dressed that morning, or it might be that they are not feeling themselves. They're not feeling good. They're not feeling confident. So it's really about trying to just spot these signs. So we each have many conversations, and we help each other in various things. So I've had people that I think may need speaking to, but I may feel like I'm not the right person necessarily. So I will speak to another mental health first aider that I think may be able to approach them slightly differently. And we're hoping, obviously, once our offices open back up, that these conversations get easier and we'll be able to help people more. But overall, yeah, we consider it a big success, and hoping to, as I said, double the numbers really, and just get the awareness out there more.
Yeah. Like you say, the taboo is kind of gradually kind of ebbing away, isn't it? Which has got to be healthy and a good thing. I know certainly from our point of view, we're being asked more recently to provide kind of confidential helpline type advice to staff. So whereas normally we would be working with, you know, the managers and the directors of a business, a couple of clients have come to us and said, actually, we'd like to provide our staff with a confidential outlet in order, because they might be more comfortable raising an issue with you than with us, you know, they might, and so if we can tell them there's somewhere confidential for them to go. So, you know, these things are definitely, you know, and obviously that's not really a full mental health first aid thing, because we're not there in the business kind of being able to spot things, but nevertheless it's a sign, I think, of where companies are going with this, in terms of recognizing that these sort of support services are needed.
I think from my point of view, it really is anything you can do as a business, because obviously there'll be people listening today that will be in much smaller businesses where they don't have the financial resources to throw money at EAP systems and so on. But, you know, even sending your staff an email reminding them of helplines available to the public, for example. As you said, people may not want to speak to mental health first aiders, but I've had a couple of instances over the couple of years where I've actually directed someone to a couple of resources online, or even the, you know, Samaritans or our EAP system, because they don't necessarily want to speak to me about it, but they would rather speak to someone completely anonymously, because a lot of the time it's not necessarily work stress. It might be that they've lost someone, or can be financial stress. Financial problems are a huge trigger point for stress and mental health illness, and obviously with, you know, the pandemic, that's probably brought a lot more to the forefront. So anything that you can do as a business, I think, because it can lead to huge absences, it can lead to claims if you deal with someone with, you know, if you approach the person in the wrong way or use the wrong terminology, it can be a huge claim against the company, or obviously just sickness absence. You want to try and avoid as much of that as you can.
Great. And you mentioned, I mean, obviously signposting, and I'm going to come back to that, because I know some of Menzies communication has been about providing a lot of information and signposting kind of general tips and where to go for more help, and that's something I'm going to come back to. Met people on the call may have noticed that we've just added some new help sheets to the portal, and I'm just going to come back to that at the end and show people where those are, because they are things that you could share with your employees, and they do have in them places, kind of freely accessible places to go if you're struggling with particular aspects of this. So yeah, that's something that we'll come to at the end. But Rich, thanks, that's been really fantastic. So we were thinking to ourselves, if we were going to come up with our sort of, you know, 4-step plan, I don't know why we picked 4, but there you go, it seemed like the right number, with our kind of the sort of 4 steps to kind of building an approach and understanding to mental health issues, what would they be? And as I say, we're going to set these out in a document that we'll add to the portal and let you know that it's there. So step 1 would be kind of to know that you have legal responsibilities as an employer, and, you know, Rich has alluded to that in terms of, you know, the possibility of claims and things like that. So So starting off with health and safety legislation, you know, the Health and Safety at Work Act is, you know, it covers mental illness and stress as much as it does physical illness. And I mean, if you look at the Health and Safety Executive website on mental health, it says whether work is causing the health issue or aggravating it, employers have a legal responsibility to help their employees. Work-related mental health issues must be assessed to measure the levels of risk to staff. Where a risk is identified, steps must be taken to remove it or reduce it as far as reasonably practicable. So that's the same base process that's always been there for your classic kind of slips, trips and falls, or electrical safety, or, you know, work environment safety. Same process, assess your risks, and then put in place mitigation for where you see, you know, that there are risks that could manifest themselves. And it's the same with mental health. So there's an essential kind of process to go through there. And that might lead to policies and solutions that will then come a little bit further in our plan. So, so the second part of kind of knowing your legal responsibilities is also understanding some basics about the Equality Act and the fact that mental health can fall within the statutory definition of disability, which provides then protection for employees from discrimination. In short, the definition of disability is a condition that has a substantial and long-term effect on an individual's ability to carry out day-to-day activities. And I think we can see from that, you know, mental health definitely can fall within that definition. And of course, where that applies, you of course are obliged to make reasonable adjustments for that employee in order to be able to manage your risk of claims on the one hand, as Rich was saying, but also to help resolve issues and accommodate people in a way that they can still contribute. And the third one is around making sure that you have policies in place and management practice to address bullying and harassment, which can obviously be another workplace source of stress and poor mental health. And that's quite a common situation where people are suffering. So again, another area where, you know, having a proper approach to that is important. So step one is about kind of understand the legal framework and your legal responsibilities. And then step two is about kind of having good management practice, policies, you know, training and communication, and all of the things that Karen, Chris and Rich have talked about really falls within that heading. And there are lots of things actually that are practical, inexpensive, you know, that can be done along the lines that we've been talking about this morning. Step three, then, a really key one that Richard's touched on, is recognizing the signs of poor mental health, because I think this is one of the hardest things, because as with most things, you know, the manager has the responsibility to identify and deal with a lot of these things, and this is quite a delicate area. So you can understand people's reticence, their nervousness. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to make matters worse. So you can see that it's delicate. But recognizing the signs of poor mental health is a really important thing for people to do. And Rich has given us a good insight to that. So it's about those changes in personality, you know, spotting people where their energy levels have dropped, you know, where their decision making may become, you know, delayed, or they're hesitant, or they're making bad decisions. Their timekeeping could be all over the place. Obviously their absence levels may be high. They might be working all hours. I mean, presenteeism is a thing, you know, people who are actually working all hours of the day and night. And I know certainly with more home working, that's quite an issue where, you know, the lines between work and home become so blurred that you feel like you're kind of on duty 24 hours a day. You know, is a real risk. And, you know, a general decline in performance and contribution. So building that understanding, I think specifically for people who are managing teams, but also supported, I think, by that kind of general communication about the fact that this is we recognize that these are issues, we recognize that people struggle, that we want to be able to help. So it's very much about creating that culture where it's okay. This is a thing that we recognize and we want to help, and here are some practical solutions. Create that environment and then help managers within that environment to be able to actually spot things, or be approachable to people, or if they are approached, to know what to say, to know what questions to ask, what to say and what not to say, and to know what's available for them to be able to signpost people to the right places. And that's actually our kind of step 4, is being confident and open about how to approach mental health, aiming for early intervention. I think the fact that stress and mental health has been a bit of a taboo means companies have been reticent to talk openly about it, and I think that's the biggest change that we can see at the moment, is that is really opening up. I think there's still a long way to go, but there has been a real sea change, I think, in companies' willingness to recognise it. So in short, how do you do that? Well, we've talked about have a mental health policy as part of that, kind of covering your partly about your legal responsibility, but also partly about making it clear to your workforce that you recognise this as an issue. Have a policy. Train managers in the signs and how to have those conversations, very much along the lines that Rich has talked about. Don't force employees to talk, but reiterate that there's support available. You can't sit someone down and say, tell me about your, it's not quite as easy, but tell me about your mental health. We're doing an audit. It's kind of, so, you have got to be a bit clever about it. Use professionals when necessary, so access to occupational health advisors, or where issues are identified, then actually some external support is useful to help you work out with that employee what the best course of action for them might be. And then having those clear pathways for employees to source help. We've mentioned employee assistance programs, obviously the mental health first aiders, HR departments, people in the business who might be identified as those who are suitable to be a bit of a focal point for anyone who's got problems. So to open it up and provide some solutions. So those are our kind of four main steps. Karen, I'm going to come back to you for any sort of final practical advice.
Okay.
But,
Chris, I'm guessing at this point we don't have any comments in the chat, or
we don't. No, we haven't got any questions, any live questions at the moment. We've just got the question that you've been answered, that somebody had submitted in advance.
Yeah, I'll come back to that at the end. I just say at this point, I'm going to sort of sum up where we are and just our best tips for kind of practical advice. And if you've got anything you'd like to share with us, this would be a great time to pop it in the chat. We're really interested, what you've done that's worked, because I think when we were planning this session, we recognised that it's a hugely challenging area. Every scenario is different. We all feel like we've got a different level of capability in terms of handling these situations with other people. So, we've tried to gather together our best advice, but we're not in any way saying that this is simple. And it's certainly an evolving picture as well. I think we're probably much better at talking about it and handling it than we would have been 2, 3, 4 years ago. Certainly at Menzies, it's come on leaps and bounds in terms of our communication and understanding. So it's kind of something you can definitely start to invest some time and understanding in, and it will definitely reap some rewards. So what were our best practical suggestions? Well, not surprisingly for HR people, we'd really like you to think about policy, not just some stuffy old few paragraphs that you stick in your handbook, but actually sit down and think about what approach you want to take as a business, how you're going to communicate with your employees, how you're going to tackle individual issues when you have them, and what general support you'd like to put in place. And that starts to generate an attitude in your business, an openness, language that you can use, and give your employees some understanding as to what your approach is going to be. So do think about a policy and then really make it work. I think I'm going to say use positive language and openly communicate. You might not be able to do that until you can access some resources. So that's why starting with a policy is a really good idea, and then looking at where you can access the right kind of communication for your business. We've been very fortunate in that we've got a very good provider at Menzies, which is our health provider, and they have also given us access to some excellent communication materials which we can use. They've been really good to share and very practical in nature. We've taken those, and Ed's going to tell you how you can share in those if you don't have such a resource. But that's been really good for us. I think training managers, giving them the confidence, just in general awareness and understanding, and to have a very simple conversation if they think it's needed. If you decide to go a stage further and take people like Richard that one stage further, I think that's great. But just some general awareness and understanding for your managers to spot the signs and have that initial conversation is a really good investment to have. And the other thing I think that really works is if you potentially have a champion in your business, is there somebody who is influential, known in the business, happy and confident to talk, potentially from personal experience, and kind of to spearhead your communication? I think that's really powerful. I'm not talking about seniority. I'm talking about somebody who can talk with some integrity and experience about coping with these issues and give your company message some real oomph there. If you're lucky enough to have somebody like that, then really use them, because I think it's a very powerful way to do it. Any help we can give, let us know. In terms of accessing professional support, occupational health advisors are invaluable when you're dealing with individual cases, particularly where you're transitioning people back to their work and their responsibilities. EAPs are fantastic, highly cost effective. As we said, external training for mental health first aiders could well be worth the investment for you. All of those things, and certainly training your managers to have those initial conversations, we can help with that. I would access external help for all of those things when you need it. And I suppose I'd lastly finish with when you do have an employee who needs help and support. They will be complex, potentially difficult cases, very difficult for the individual. I'd encourage you to seek advice on what the best practice is for those, to approach them with fairness, consistency, understanding, absolute confidentiality, all of those things, and come and ask us for help if it's the first time you've done that. It won't be a quick fix. It won't necessarily be fixed once and for all. These issues reoccur in people's lives. And I would say be prepared to potentially have a long-term ongoing support situation for certain employees when they need it. And going back to the start, if you have a policy, you'll have a much better idea of how you'd like to manage that when it happens. I think that's it for me. Does anybody else want to kind of chip in on any of that?
Thanks, Karen. The only other thing I was going to add to that was just on the employee assistance program that we've mentioned a few times. It's something that's quite hard for smaller businesses to access because they're normally provided at kind of on a bulk basis to large companies. But we can, through us, you can access an employee assistance program, and actually it's a very reasonable cost per head, which does provide you with kind of third-party specialist information services for people struggling with any issue, not just work issues, but we've mentioned kind of debt, bereavement, family issues, all kinds of things, and they can be really good for again providing you with often it's so difficult to know how to help people, but at least that does enable you to offer services. And there's normally a level of counselling that's available through that for people who need it. So that's one thing. So again, talk to us about that if that's a potential solution you think might be for you. The last thing I was going to do was then just show you, I'm going to share my screen again, because there's just show you where these resources are on our portal. Karen just alluded to them again in relation to these information, these kind of help sheets that I mentioned at the beginning. So can you see the portal there? Right, okay, so a couple of things actually. So if you go into the documents area, we've just provided a number of these. Now, these come from ones that were provided to us within Menzies from our own HR function. So we've repurposed them, and they're now available for you to use and potentially, you know, use for your employees as well. But let me just pick one at random. So there's one here on sleep. So it gives you some general information about what, you know, why sleep's important, and some interesting insights on that, a few tips on what to do, and then, as we say, some link to external resources that are available online for people to explore further if they want to. So they're, you know, they're pretty accessible, pretty practical, and there's quite a few there for you to have a look at. So that was that one. Let me just go back to the list. So sleep, self-care, proactive health management, mental health, stress, food, families and relationships, exercise, depression. There's quite a few topics there, and I think we are going to be adding to those as we go along, but we'll obviously highlight those to community members as we add them. So just finally then to say, if we go to the events page, thank you very much for joining us this morning. As I say, we will be putting a summary and the recording back onto the portal next week, so that you and others can come back to it if you wish to. Our next event is on the 17th of February, where we're looking at contracts of employment, what to cover. The one after that is in March, managing employee underperformance, and there will be more to follow after that. So please do sign up if you haven't. We'll obviously keep reminding you of what's out there to access, and as ever, you know, please let us know if there's anything else you'd like to see in the community, discussions to be started, information required. We want to make it as useful a resource as we possibly can.
Sorry, Ed, I nearly interrupted you there. Can I come back to the question that we had before, because I was worried you were going to say goodbye then?
Sorry, no, we have got the question that came in advance.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes for questions now. So if you've got a question, do post that for us, and I'll quickly address the question that we had in advance. So thank you very much for asking us what our views were on how we would measure the success of a mental health strategy within a business. We had to think about this, and I also talked to our HR director, Alison, about how her thoughts on measuring the success of what we've done at Menzies. She had some really interesting feedback. I'll share that with you, and I'll sort of share our thoughts. You know, we were going to recourse to say, well, you know, you would look at how your attendance has potentially improved, what level of absenteeism you had in the business around, you know, health and stress issues, whether that was declining. You'd maybe look at staff surveys and see if there was feedback there around support you provided. But actually, the reality that Menzies has experienced in the last couple of years is that COVID has skewed some of that in terms of getting reasonable feedback. Sickness absence data at the moment is not really realistic and that helpful. You know, actually absenteeism has gone down, but it's partly because people might not have felt able to come to work in the days when you came to work in our environment, but they've potentially worked from home. Some people might have found working from home while stressed or dealing with personal issues that would normally have triggered an absence. They've actually carried on working. So although we would normally recourse to sickness data, that's actually not that accurate at the moment. And so you've got to treat that with a little bit of caution. I'm not saying it's not a measure for the future, but it's a bit skewed at the moment. And, you know, being realistic, a lot of the data in terms of your success potentially would have come anecdotally because you were with people and you were present in the office and you were able to see, you know, the atmosphere and the interaction and how people were generally behaving at work. And we're missing that at the moment in our environment because the offices are largely closed. So we can't particularly gather that data. So the things that we have been able to see, though, we've still held some staff forums. We've still held some employee engagement surveys. Although we haven't specifically questioned this topic, because any interaction you have with our mental first aid or any other support mechanism is confidential. But interestingly, the support provided has come up in the comments where people are allowed to say any general feedback. So there has been appreciation and feedback about how useful those elements have been. Mental first aiders, the EAP, and also just the general communication through COVID have all been recognised in that feedback. So that anecdotal feedback from employees is seen as a measure of success. The other thing which Richard will have experienced is that our HR team pull the mental first aiders together twice a year. Obviously, there's anecdotal feedback in the meantime, but they have 2 events a year. They don't share cases, but they do share kind of frequency of contact, what their successes have been, and they're also able to kind of undergo a bit of a support sharing mechanism if you found anything difficult to deal with. So once again, some real success factors that are able to be shared, not necessarily statistically valid, but still in terms of seeing an impact of the measures that Menzies have taken. They're all certainly seen as being ways that we're measuring it that have been very useful. I think the only other thing she said was really important for us. Richard and his team will undergo refresher training. As part of that refresher training, the trainer will check in with them in terms of how they've handled things, any issues that they want to share, and what sort of feedback they've had from the people that they've interacted with. So that's kind of another measure of success.
Great. Well, thanks, Karen, and thank you for that question. In the absence of any others, and team, have you got any other comments you'd like to make just as we close? No, we're all good. Okay, well, thanks ever so much, everyone, for attending. We're really grateful. Good to, well, see you, kind of, and hopefully we'll see you next time. But in the meantime, I hope you get through Blue Monday okay, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.